is a gem in New York City called the AKC Museum of the Dog. If you don't know about it, you are missing something incredible. It's wonderful to have the curator here, Alan Fausel. Now, you have a show on now, Alan, that I think has got to be one of your dillies, if you want to use the word dilly. The New Yorker covers over the years that have included or featured dogs. How did you come up with that idea? Being a curator, you have to constantly think of clever doggy ideas, right?
You're always trying to come up with something, especially when you're trying with limited resources. You try to do
Yes,
things out of the collection. But
yes.
one of our friends and members and supporters is a Margaret Foxmore, who is a photographer who does a lot of work in the city. She has a book of dogs outside the ring, a lot of photography with the Metropolitan Transit Police
Oh,
and photographing the service dogs there. She's had exhibitions here. And she came by at a dog show and dropped off about 50 covers she had collected of dogs on New Yorkers. And I said, let's do something with that. And we put them together, put 45 up. So it came prepackaged. And we thought the idea, the 100th anniversary of the New Yorker this year, we would put it up. And these are all picked by her. They aren't all the dog covers of the many that years of the 5,000 or so of the covers that are from the New Yorker, but the many of them, these are the ones that she collected, and we put them on display.
how wonderful of her to have done that collection. People collect sometimes the most peculiar things, and then other times when you hear someone's collected something, you think, oh, I wish I'd done that. I wish I'd kept the thing that someone else has carefully curated for themselves. So she donated it to the museum for permanently?
No, she's lent them to us. At this point, we may ask for a few of them. I don't know if we need all of them. But one of the things about it was we were talking with the New Yorker, and there were other covers that could be used that over the years. But I saw their exhibitions, and they were in reproduction. What I wanted was the actual covers. And you come to this, it's really interesting is the fact we took the actual physical, quite dog-eared covers
Yeah.
and mounted them so you can see the whole thing. So it would give you the sort of the remembrance of those old copies of the New Yorker at your aunt's coffee table or the
Yes.
doctor's waiting room. So it has that physical quality. I think people react to that very well.
And so when people come through, there is a big, not just the delight at seeing these amazing differences in the style in which these covers were drawn, but their own personal nostalgia.
Exactly. And also, I think to a certain extent, it's baked in the cake by the fact that these were selected and meant to be engaging on their own as original artworks. That's why they made it to the cover. So you already have a selection process there that makes them interesting. And different styles from the early Art Deco works in the 20s and the 30s through what I would call more the raging satire of Peter Ardo and
Yes.
Charles Adams in the 40s and 50s. And then it's over the last 30 years, 30, 40 years, have become a little more placid, not as direct in their commentary.
But they're artful. They're all quite
Oh,
clearly works of art.
they certainly are. And they're popular cartoonists now. We have a lot from Mark Ulrichsen. We have about five from him because Margaret had a relationship with Mark. So I
Oh,
talked to him, and he helped out with some of the copy. And then George Booth, who's very famous for his sort of bull terrier dog. He's almost iconic it's almost a mascot these days for the publication. So it's still going, and there's still people who are involved in it today.
so when you, as a curator, you've dealt with all kinds of art and probably objects, obviously, as well. But I think one of the art forms that is undervalued are cartoons. And I used to know a wonderful woman who died very young, relatively young, who was the cartoon editor for Playboy magazine. And people used to say, as a kind of oh no, I only get Playboy magazine. This is back in the days when it was like really risque. I only get it for the cartoons. But there really were people only getting it for the cartoons, and many of her cartoonists were also New Yorker cartoonists, and she called them her artists. And it gave me a different respect and appreciation of how important an important art form cartooning is, if that's in fact a verb. Is it something you were aware of yourself as a curator and an art appreciator?
Well, if you probably don't know entire background, but
Oh,
if
I
you,
bet we'd all like to know it. You're there, you are at the Museum of the Dog. You must love dogs, amongst other things. But what else? What else?
I came to this as a curator and an appraiser for over 30 years, an art appraiser. And you might have seen me for the past 30 years. I've been on Antiques Roadshow,
Oh
you
my
know that program?
goodness, you're that guy. I've heard of the show, and everyone knows about the Rembrandt found underneath the sink.
Yeah. So I've been doing that since the first season.
Hi,
And I only
what a
came
cool
to,
job.
I worked for auction houses and doing appraisals. And it was 99. I started a sale here in New York of dog art. Or we started with Doyle and Bonham's auction houses
I
and
remember it.
ran for 17 years. So
And
I,
it ran around the Madison Square Garden show around
you're
that
on Westminster.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's times. I'm fairly well versed in that. And as you mentioned, what was interesting, you just mentioned about cartoons being undervalued. I sometimes mention that here because dog paintings aren't that expensive. If you're into the six figures, you're towards the top end, the low six figures, $100,000, $200,000. And there's only maybe half dozen that are above that in my collection. But probably just second to that is one of our Snoopy cartoons by Charles Schulz. And if I
Oh,
were to sell it today, it would be about $45,000. So there
oh,
is some
darn.
interest. I have sold Peter Arno originals and Charles Adams originals. They can run in the $3,000 to $5,000 range. So there's a bit of a collecting base for them. I don't know what a Thurber would go for. I haven't had
Ooh,
one, but I can
just
imagine they would. Some of the more famous of the cartoonists.
yes. And people only maybe they see an Arno or they see one of these styles. They're like, oh, yes, of course, I know that. That's just in my consciousness without realizing it's an artist who developed a style. And in the case of the show you have on, they all love dogs. I don't know. Do you think the New Yorker assigned them a cover and said, we need dogs this week or this month? Or did the artist come to the New Yorker and say, what do you think?
I think for most of them, they weren't. They were concepts, and the dogs sometimes play an ancillary role. I mentioned in the text, sometimes they're a prop like a chauffeur
Yes,
or a
yes.
maid to indicate station or the type of dog. If it's a purebred dog, a poodle that's obviously, or Pekingese, a lap dog, or if it's a sporting dog, you have a hunter. So sometimes it's an accoutrement to the character. But in the case of the Westminster, they don't like me using the word obligatory, but I'm going to like the musical word obligato, that they almost had to have one around Westminster. And
I
and
see.
in fact, behind me is the 8 we had from February, the second week of February, over various years, and they all relate to the show.
That makes perfect sense because the New Yorker, even though it's an internationally acclaimed literary magazine, really was New York based, is New York based, talk of the town. It's about New York. And the Westminster Dog Show at Madison Square Garden at the first week, the first Monday and Tuesday of every February forever and ever is a really big deal. So I hadn't considered that it was something that the New Yorker had to cover, as you say, obligatory, because why would you ignore it? How could you? Why would you? Thousands of dogs and people descending. So do you expect you've got this show up now? It's utterly delightful. Do you expect that when February rolls around for the next Westminster show, will it still be up or does it come down?
It's going to be coming down in early December. However, we're going to retain, I've talked to Margaret, retain some of the 8 Westminster related covers from the New Yorker just to add to the mix. We're doing a show of honoring Westminster's 150th anniversary. This will be the next show. So we're going to keep on some of the Westminster covers, in addition to the 15 or so paintings, sculptures, ceramics we have of former Westminster Best in Shows, and additionally generous helping of items from the Westminster Kennel Club's archives.
Oh, nice. Because that'd be something people don't have a chance to see. What you have as a library, which had the great good luck even during COVID to take advantage of, is a really remarkable library of drawings, but also mostly books and magazine articles and the AKC Gazette going back forever. It's really an amazing treasure and a place if people, I'm saying this funnily, come in from the rain. If you want to spend a couple of hours just enjoying something about dogs that you'd have no other access to, I think that your Museum of the Dog is the only place they could find that. And it's really quite a treasure trove. photographs, articles, books. Do people come in there just to browse and peruse, or is that not recommended or welcomed?
No, it's actually specifically planned that way. If you come to our second floor, we have a library and activity table set up for people to do drawings and for
Yes.
children's activities and other things throughout the year, crafts. But it was really one of the pleasures. I helped move this museum. That I was hired to move it from St. Louis, where it was really
Yeah.
middle, it was in the middle of no place, and it was even outside of St. Louis by 20 miles, so it wasn't really that well populated. But we moved it here, and there the similar library, about 4,000 volumes, were was rarely used. There, talking to people there, one or two people. Here, every weekend it's packed. So
Oh, that's great.
that's a great joy to my heart. But what we have is, as you mentioned, this is 4,000 volumes of the AKC's 18,000 volumes. The rest are upstairs with the AKC headquarters, the rare books, all the runs of magazines, all the dog club records, etc. But down here we keep more general books for the general public. It's not lending, but things about art, things about grooming, things about different aspects, some fiction, some comic books, and also a wall of every breed from A to Z.
So it really is something people of any interest level about dogs could come and have a look. It
Yes,
isn't just for dog fanciers or dog breeders. It's really for the general public, all of whom have some version of a dog. I don't think they're going to be coming through your door unless they have some version of a dog. Do you?
they're just curious. It's a great place. One of the things you mentioned, though, is the American Kennel Club is probably the only institution related to animals in the country that could put this together. The resources, they had a collection of paintings starting in the 1880s, and when the AKC started, we started the museum 42 years ago, actually 43 now. So it's been accumulating a lot of work, but they have the resources and the history to be able to pull it off.
I think that reading some of those magazine articles from 30, 40, 50 years ago is a great way of just looking at how society was different, how differently we talked about each other, wrote about each other, how we documented events. It was very ladylike, may not be the right word, but it was so civilized. It was so genteel. I found when I was looking and reading up on the thing that I was doing research on, I thought, what a gentler time. What a time when people could just indulge in their love for dogs, and everybody was a lady and a gentleman around it. If they were poor or rich, and it didn't matter. It was really just a sense of decency. Do you get that feeling, or do you feel you're insulated there from the Sturm und Drang outside?
No, part of my job is to put this all together, and I talk about with my colleagues and the people who are who are not art people, but people who are in the breeding world, in the dog world, and they know all the dogs and the breeders and the owners. And I say I feel that way about if I were walking into a dog show of the 1900s, I would know the breeders and the dogs and the of
Oh,
them.
nice.
This with that. And one of the things you mentioned is the Gazette, which is one of the longest continuously running publications since 1884. So I think I'm 86, but the Gazette is all available online now. So you get
Right.
to it that way. And you,
I was taking pictures of it with my little camera of the
no, it's
page.
online and fully searchable. But
Oh,
what's interesting, you mentioned that one of my favorite authors is Freeman Lloyd, and he has this very, not so much formal, but very Victorian manner of speaking. Then he's writing in the 1930s, and you realize he was born in 1860. And so you get that time capsule, which is even for the 30s was precious.
I think it's really important that we know how long our history is with dogs in modern society. We all know about the cavemen and everything, but to realize that so many people that preceded us worshiped, adored, revered, took care of dogs. It's a really there's a whole feeling of adopt, don't shop, and it's better to adopt a dog from a shelter than to buy a dog from a responsible breeder. It's not something I believe because I know, as you do, now that you've also been immersed in this world for a while, that the people who breed dogs are passionate about them. Leave aside puppy mills. That's unfortunate result of supply and demand. Too much demand. How do you supply it? But the people who love dogs, and you see it throughout your museum, there's just respectful, joyful reverence in all of the objects. And I think it's a really nice place to connect with that and see that we've always been like this. Maybe we're a little nutty or a little more neurotic, a little more helicoptery with our dogs, but people have always, in modern society, our grandparents, our great grandparents, they've all been there. They've walked the walk, even when dogs were loose in New York City. There was a time when they weren't pathetic strays, they were just loose. They were a neighborhood dog. It's interesting to think how much we've evolved to now everybody has to be so careful and cautious in dog parks and muzzles and leashes and signs and stuff. Do you have that sense in seeing your collection of how long the New York history is with dogs?
It's interesting. We had a collar in a collar show recently, which belonged to Samuel Tilden's grandniece, but it was actually 15 Gramercy, which is where the National Arts Clubs
Yeah.
was the actual. And I started getting into it and realized that there's a lot of things that happened. And I was discussing recently about the Victorian era and a lot of the reforms that came in, about just social reforms of people, but with dogs as well, where they started eliminating bear and bull baiting, when they started eliminating
Yes.
carting, when they started having licenses, when they started having different things. It was a very Victorian thing, this codification.
Yes.
Dog breeding had been going on for years, for centuries beforehand, in a very purposeful manner. But now they were writing it down, taking
Yes.
notes, and improving on it in a very Victorian way. Excuse me. And we now have clubs, and the AKC is one of them. And we promote responsible dog ownership. The AKC breeders are the most responsible of all dog breeders. They adhere to stricter standards. People don't know that the AKC breeder will take a dog back at any point during its life.
Yeah, that's right. If the person doesn't can't manage the dog or gets ill or has financial problems, these are things that I try to talk about frequently on this show and also in my book, The Dog Bible. I think that an important place to not have division and discord is in our life with dogs. We should understand that everybody involved with dogs is there for a good reason, has a good purpose, has a good intention. So there's no judgment or criticism. Those people that don't have a purebred dog because they choose not to should embrace this culture because it's fascinating. It's so much a part of humans. And it's only gotten better, not worse. Even there's some breeds that, have deteriorated physically, let's say, over time with breeding that was intended to do something and did something else. But this is true of all the animals that people keep. And then they correct it. There's a pendulum that will swing. I think it's just important to embrace the joy of dogs. And I think the museum does that. I don't know, I don't think it's still up. The On Point, you had a sporting dog show. I'm really sorry I missed it unless it's still there. Talk about that. Sporting dogs are so incredible and so interwoven with human history.
It's a show called Honoring the Point that came from a collection of a longtime breeder and AKC person, but she was also interested in horses, had a connection with the National Sporting Library in Middleburg. And we're good friends with them and done shows with them. I just said the
Oh,
collar show. And so went there, but they had it already packaged up. So I said, let's take it up here and show it off to our folks. And she had a lot of Gordon setters, and you learn about the development of setters. It is interesting. You mentioned about the history. It is during the Victorian era that dog painting really hits its stride, but it goes on before that. I was going through one of my art colleagues was just in Paris, and they had the tray. I'm not sure it was there or here in New York, but it was the Tres Riches of Jean Dubarry, and they had to open it up, and it was manuscript illustrations from the 13th and 14th century where they're
wow.
dogs. And the dogs at those times, they were recognizable breeds, certainly greyhounds and others that were used for the hunt. There were certain dogs which were lap dogs even back then. And
That's
they understood breeding, but not in a way that was as codified as Gregor Mendel or someone like that.
and of course they had guard dogs, lots of guard dogs, and they had war dogs.
Yep, we
I
had
mean,
the Molosser types. You had a whole
yeah.
variety of them. But it's interesting. But you mentioned also about the health of dogs. One of the things that people don't know is each breed has, well, if you belong to the club, you register your dog, and you're basically required to do tests on hips and elbows and eyes. And
Mhm.
each breed will have a specific one for whatever trait they're trying to eliminate, genetic trait. And it differs from breed to breed, whatever they're working on. And in some cases, the German Shepherd wanted his temperament. So
They
when
got
the military or police are looking for German Shepherds who are better at attacking, they don't go to American dogs.
that's right.
They go to
That's a
Central
really
Europe to get
good
them.
point.
But it's interesting that, and even I have two spaniels, a Welsh Springer and an
Nice.
English Cocker,
Oh, nice.
and they are spayed, but I still do the tests to let my breeder know if something's going on with that litter.
Oh, interesting. So that's what they do. They do all these x-rays if you were going to breed a dog. Now, I, on the other hand, because of health reasons entirely, will never have another spayed or neutered dog. So my dog's intact, but I don't intend to breed him. But if I did, it explains why a well-bred, purebred dog is so expensive. The mother and father, you have to wait till they're a certain age and then x-ray their hips. And that is obviously an expensive procedure, and their knees and eye tests, depending on the breed, and other stuff with blood work. So you're right, the health is carefully looked after. Well, we're running low on time, Alan. I just really hope to get people to come in and see these New Yorker covers. You have wonderful information underneath each cover on the wall, as one can find in a museum. So you learn a little bit more of the context. You don't just see a marvelous painting, which is what they are, or drawing, but you get to learn something about the world that it existed in. And I just think what the fact that you're in New York is such a gift to New Yorkers. And the fact that you're packed is really marvelous, is so great because children obviously love all animals and particularly dogs. And not all New York City or any city kids have the opportunity to have a dog because it is burdensome in a city. There's a lot of burden involved in how to give that dog a decent dog life and not go bankrupt or be able to live your own life and parents with two jobs. By coming to your museum, they can celebrate dogs through books and crafts. And then when they're older, they already know more. They've read a grooming book. They've learned something about dogs. And I think a museum that exists for joy, but also for education is a great combination. So thank you for being there. Can't believe you're the Antiques Roadshow guy. I'm a dope for not having known that. I've never seen it, but one hears about it all the time, and there are people utterly hooked on it. I would love to find the great British dog portraitists. They're so incredible. You go to museums in England, the old-fashioned ones, not modern ones, and you're like, oh, I would kill to have that painting. Have you ever found any of those in someone's attic? We only have a minute or two left, but I'm just curious if anybody ever got lucky.
On the roadshow, I hadn't seen, we saw a few dog paintings, they come by, but over the years of doing the dog auction, we've certainly found many. The most
Oh,
expensive
nice.
one, we sold a painting of by M's of hounds for $800,000. It's one of the highest dog painting.
Wow. So great.
And also, I was at Doyle, New York. I sold the dogs playing poker.
Oh, the famous, you're the seller
Six
of
hundred
that. That
thousand.
was such was that not the most famous iconic dog painting of all time? No.
14 of them. But yeah,
Oh, is that right?
yeah. But this was one of the great. It was a great pair of them. Yes.
That's so cool. It's wonderful that you're there. Please don't leave because all of your knowledge and wisdom and your dog love is reflected on the walls and in the showcases in the Museum of the Dog, the AKC Museum of the Dog in New York City. Thank you so much, Alan, for this great show of New Yorker covers. I will be there to see it before it closes in December. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.